This video was brought to you by NordVPN. As inflation kicks up around the world, central banks everywhere have been desperately raising interest rates to tame rising prices and prevent a so-called wage price spiral. However, this week, China's central bank did the exact opposite and actually cut its medium-term interest rate in a desperate attempt to stimulate China's lagging domestic economy. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at why the CCP might be cutting rates, whether this will actually help China's domestic economy, and some potential political implications of China's recent economic struggles. So, the headline story here is that on Monday, the People's Bank of China cut its medium-term lending rate, through which it provides one-year loans to the banking system, from 2.85% down to 2.75%. And while this might not sound like much, it's the complete opposite to what the rest of the world is doing right now, where central banks are raising rates in response to inflation. The Bank of England, for example, has raised its rate 6 times in the last year, going from 0.1% in December 2021 through to 1.75% today. The Federal Reserve in America has raised its discount rate 4 times in the last few months, going from 0.25% in early 2022 to 2.5% today. Even the ECB, who really don't like rate hikes, have reluctantly followed suit, raising their benchmark rates by 0.5 percentage points in July, their first rate hike in 11 years. So why is the People's Bank of China going in the opposite direction to everyone else? Well, it's probably because consumer demand in China, i.e. how much Chinese citizens are spending on goods and services in the domestic Chinese economy, is worryingly weak. This is part of the reason why, last month, China posted a trade surplus of $101.3 billion, the largest trade surplus for a 30-day period ever recorded by any country in history. And while that might sound like good news, and in some sense it demonstrates the strength of China's export sector, it's also a symptom of the fact that China's domestic demand is appallingly low, forcing companies to sell their goods abroad rather than at home in China. By cutting rates, the People's Bank of China is presumably hoping to get money flowing into the economy, thereby stimulating domestic demand. So why is this? Why is China's domestic demand so weak? Well, as we've detailed in other videos, it's probably related to the CCP's zero COVID strategy, which essentially involves keeping total COVID cases as close to zero as possible via restrictive and targeted lockdowns. Now, obviously, you can't really buy anything when you're in a lockdown, which is why the zero COVID policy has adversely affected domestic economic activity in China. Consumer confidence has also been affected by China's ongoing housing crisis, which we explained in more detail in other videos. But essentially, in an attempt to cash in on China's decade-long housing boom, Chinese property developers took on unsustainable amounts of debt. When the CCP cracked down on this practice by imposing their so-called 3 red lines, various property developers, most notably Evergrande, started defaulting on their loans. Spooked by these regulatory crackdowns, various developers stopped building as many homes, and consumers stopped buying them. Construction is now down nearly 50% when measured by floor space, and new home sales are down about 20% compared to last year. And some developers have even struggled to complete pre-bought houses on time, which is why thousands of Chinese homeowners have apparently refused to pay their mortgages until their homes are completed. Anyway, the recent downturn in the property market has really spooked consumers, because property is where most ordinary Chinese people invest their money. Limits on capital outflows and the volatility of the Chinese stock market mean that Chinese citizens don't really like investing their savings in equities, and instead pour it all into property, which is why house prices in certain Chinese cities are the least affordable anywhere in the world. The median house price in Shenzhen, for example, is over 40 times the median salary. It's also why property accounts for such a massive share of Chinese GDP. Recent estimates suggest that property accounts for nearly 30% of China's GDP and 70% of household wealth, about double the global average. Anyway, you get the idea. China's stumbling property sector has spooked Chinese consumers, who don't want to spend their cash when so much of their savings are tied up in shaky real estate investments. And even foreign investors have been spooked by the recent crisis, and have been offloading Chinese debt and equity at record rates. But the question is, will this reduction in interest rates revive confidence? Well, it's probably too small of a cut to actually make much of a difference, but the PBOC will be wary of making much larger cuts. Although further cuts might increase domestic spending, they could also push up inflation, especially considering rising global commodity prices. But it's not just the economic situation. Let's take a moment to look at the political implications of this slowdown. As we've explained in previous videos, the next year is of exceptional political significance for Xi Jinping. The CCP's 20th Party Congress is due to be sometime before December, and Xi will want to use the event to further consolidate his power within the party. For those of you who don't know, Party Congress is an important conference which takes place every 5 years, where the CCP's top brass decide policy and leadership structure. And while internal regulations prevent CCP members from serving more than 2 years in the same position, Xi is widely expected to either be re-elected for an unprecedented third term as the CCP General Secretary, or be elected to the office of party chairman, a position previously occupied by Mao Zedong, the party's founder, and a role that's now been dormant since 1982. Now, the problem is that if the economy is still struggling and the CCP's stated target of 5.5% GDP growth looks unattainable, Xi might decide that he needs to show strength elsewhere in order to ensure that he has sufficient political capital to claim the title of chairman. And perhaps that would mean picking fights with either the US or Taiwan. You get the idea. While China's economic slowdown is good for the rest of the world, insofar as it helps to keep global inflation down, it could provoke more bellicosity from Xi and the other hawks within the CCP. Now, that is all pretty bleak for China, so I'd understand if Xi wants to chill and watch some Stranger Things. The problem is that with the Chinese firewall in place, that's going to be difficult. If only he knew about NordVPN. It's a full suite of tools to secure your digital life, from blocking malware and preventing malicious ad trackers to helping you set more secure passwords. And there's fun stuff too, because using NordVPN, you can access the internet through other countries, which means that region-locked content is available to you from anywhere. And as they have over 5,400 servers in 59 different countries, there's a lot of choice. So when you're at home, you can stream movies and films that aren't on your streaming services, and when you're away, you can still log in via your country, preventing all of your apps from freaking out and thinking that you're being hacked. So NordVPN really is an all-in-one security solution. And with the fastest connection of any VPN out there, now's the time to get yourself protected. So if you sign up for a 2-year subscription using our link, you'll not only get a massive discount, but you'll also benefit from their 30-day free trial to give you some peace of mind while you find out how much you love it. Anyway, thanks for your support, and thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring TLDR.